Hello and welcome to the Genius Move Audio Academy podcast. My name is Paul Brewer. In this podcast, I'll chat to people who are professionally involved in the music business both here in Ireland and abroad. If you're listening to this, perhaps you have an interest in learning. Please visit geniusmove.ie, check my courses or book a one-to-one teaching session. My guest today is Tomás Mulcahy, who is a lecturer at TUS Limerick. I recently interviewed him from his home studio on a hot day, so we left the windows open and the noises that are there are there. I began by asking him how long he'd been lecturing there and about the courses he lectures on.
I've been there 15 years now. Started teaching on the music technology and production course, then moved over onto the creative broadcast and film production degree, as it's called now. So I'm across both, back and forth, depending on what's needed staff-wise. So currently I'm teaching live sound on the music tech and all aspects of audio production in first and second year for the creative broadcast course. So we have a degree, 2 degree courses. There's a level 7 on each and level 8 on each. That's 3 years and 4 years. Yeah, they're both popular courses. We get more than enough applications for the places that we have. We could provide more places if we had the resources provided to us. That's, like the rest of the public service, that's an issue. Mm. One of the interesting paths people take, actually, I think is a good one, is coming in on the music tech. And then for the 4th year, when they do the level 8, they go over to the AV side and they do a mix of music production and production for film and TV and broadcast. And I reckon those students have, they've got a nice broad skill set. They're probably the most employable. Whereas, as you know yourself, like the music business isn't, I wouldn't recommend anyone try and, open a studio or whatever. Not to make money anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like how many's in a class?
It starts out like usually around 30, 35 in first year. 4th year, then it's usually, I'm not sure about the numbers on the music tech because I haven't done 4th year there in a good while, but it'd be around 20-ish, something like that. So we get to teach more than lecture, really, and do a lot of practicals. So, you can easily do a practical we do the practicals, divide them into 2 groups, max maybe 15. So, it's the best way to learn.
Right, yeah.
A little bit of theory and a lot of putting it into practice.
You mentioned 20 in 4th year. So does that mean a third of them quit, drop out? Or?
Well, yeah, like you do get, like Ireland has the highest number of people with 3rd level degrees. And it's an issue across 3rd level, really, that there are too many people doing degrees. There's some people...
When you say too many?
Would be better off doing an apprenticeship. Well, the system isn't perfect. Like this year, the apprenticeships were put on the CAO to try and address that. So, you'll always have some students who they'd be better off doing an apprenticeship. But, sometimes people get attracted by the sexiness of music and film and all that. And they think maybe I should work in that area when just a regular 9-to-5 job doing a craft, probably more appropriate for them. You'll also get people who are just doing a degree because, one must get a degree.
Right.
And career guidance, it depends on the school. Career guidance isn't great, really. Kids, it takes them a while to figure out what they need to do. So it's not so much people dropping out, but they'd change course. They'd realise after first year that, oh, right, this is the wrong course for me. If you look at the figures across 3rd level, that's pretty high as well. People, the dropouts in first year, they move to another course or another career path.
So is that first year a kind of a dry run, let's see how college works type of year? Is that how that kind of works? Is it acceptable to have a 40% dropout, do you think? Or 30%, whatever?
No, I wouldn't, we don't have a 30% dropout rate. Like if you go to 3rd year, you get your level 7 degree. Then you may or may not choose to go to 4th year to get the level 8.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, a level 7 is sufficient, to get a job of some kind, not necessarily in the area. For example, you'll have students who they'll go and work for Intel, just an ordinary job, but you'll need a level 7 for a job like that.
Right. And is it the fact that you've done a level 7, no matter what the kind of subject is?
Yeah. Dell, it's not Intel, Dell, yeah. That's kind of their
That proves you can count.
It proves you can read a brief and follow the instructions and meet the deadlines, do a little bit of critical thinking, you have some research skills, you can work on a team.
Right.
You know, if you look at the QQI guidelines for degrees, you know, those are important fundamentals on any course. And coming out of the Leaving Cert, you know, depending on the school, again, they mightn't have those kinds of skills, and the age group as well. So, you know, things like critical listening and teamwork, reflective practice, those kinds of basics, those fundamentals. You know, I mean, yeah, we are teaching like music production or film and video, etc. But we're also teaching, you know,
how to learn,
the kind of skills that you need to. Yeah, exactly. Learning how to learn. Yeah, that informs a lot of what we do.
Is the music thing less focused on the music thing, do you think, overall in your current teaching?
Yeah, for my current teaching, yeah. It's just that, like, it's a distribution of staff skills. I would have worked doing location sound and post and live sound, you know, before I did my teaching diploma. So I've got the experience to teach those. So I get to do those ones.
The teaching diploma, where did you do that?
Oh, I did that in UL in 2004. And then I spent 2 years, 2-ish years, was it 2 or 3 years? Yeah. It's more actually, yeah. It was 3 years teaching second level.
Oh, right.
You know, doing maternity leave covers and subbing and that kind of stuff. Music.
And all right, music,
and
yeah.
CSP.
This is our second attempt at doing the interview due to internet bandwidth issues. And in our first run, you mentioned, what was it, dual teaching? Was it 2 teachers per class?
Oh, yeah, team teaching.
Team teaching, yeah.
Team teaching, yeah.
Yeah, like I've never heard of that. And that seems like a brilliant idea to me. Insofar as my experience of teaching minute last year or whatever, to be going for the hour constantly is a hard gig to do. It didn't have huge numbers, but nevertheless, it was a difficult thing to do. How does team teaching work? Do you both plan to, this is what we're going to teach today? Is that how it works? Or
you've actually raised 2 interesting issues there in the art of teaching. Like, you have the hour to work in, and how do you use it? That's one thing. But team teaching, like, my dad started teaching in 1973, and I guess it's in the blood because my mother used to do a Nianra, that'd be a nursery school, Osgoilga. So they're both teachers, and it took me a while to come around to the fact that it is kind of in my blood to do it. But he used to do a lot of team teaching, like in the 90s. He started doing it, and he developed kind of a formula in his school to do it. Like when you have a colleague that you can collaborate with. Yeah, secondary school, yeah.
All right, okay.
Yeah. So it's just collaboration and teamwork. So we'd work together. Like Peter Diffley that you mentioned, that's our mutual friend.
Yes.
Like Peter was amazing. Peter was employed as a technician, but he had so much experience, so enthusiastic for the subject, and a highly intelligent guy. I mean, he got headhunted by a pharmaceutical in the US. That's what happened there. You know,
that was a surprise. What is a surprise to me?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Like, yeah.
Oh, you do that?
Well, I mean, yeah. He's just an engineer, like a proper engineer. So he's doing production line electronic stuff. Initially was his thing, you know, so real electronics, you know, if you wanted someone to build a fuzz pedal, Peter could just draw you the circuit diagrams, basic stuff. I remember him actually, there was a new lecturer came in who was a little bit thrown into the deep end, and Peter was tutoring him on PLC systems. That's the production line system for controlling productions electronically on a factory floor. Peter was amazing. But like I could team teach with Peter because, like, you know, Peter did sound with Daniel O'Donnell, you know, big stuff, but proper productions, you know, everything's done right. So he had so much experience, and the two of us working together teaching live sound was just great because he'd have a slightly different perspective on things. You know, we had the same goal ultimately, sound reinforcement. But Peter is just so clear, enthusiastic, knowledgeable, passionate about the subject, and it's just a collaboration. I think it's important for students to see staff collaborating because it's all about teamwork on anything, especially in the world of film and TV.
That's true as well, yeah.
So we do a lot of what we call integrated projects. On the editing module, the simple model would be the students will do a production, a documentary or a short. They'll do it as a team. They'll have different roles, but they'll have
How do they pick the roles?
Be the editing assignment. Yeah, it's a process, isn't it? It's a kind of negotiation and then figuring out where their skills are.
Right.
Ultimately, they'll get a taste of every role. The idea being, I mean, for example, like my subject, I think, teaching sound on a film course, it's like teaching economics on a business course or biochemistry on a medical degree, it's the subject that everyone hates and everybody fails. And they don't like it because they don't understand it. It's just not their thing. So teaching
what is
sound
their thing,
to, well, they're visual. They're visual, creative people. So sound just, it's interesting teaching on the film course versus the music course. The music course, they come in and they have a lot of ideas, maybe preconceptions about sound and music. Whereas the film kids come in with no perceptions, no preconceptions. So I find that different challenges teaching each. Possibly easier to teach the film students because they don't have any preconceptions really. So you can start with the fundamentals and build it up. So I use, I don't know if you've ever seen Jason Corey's critical listening and ear training stuff. He has a book and a bunch of research and software modules for practicing, recognizing frequencies, recognizing reverb, stereo image, all this kind of stuff. Very well thought out. So I did a master's a few years ago, just researching how to teach those kinds of things.
All right, okay.
And got deep into it, so figured out a system. And we have a PhD at the moment who's developing a software system that would possibly be a lot better than what Jason Corey has. So he's doing amazing work. I sort of was the internal examiner for that project. But I mean, really, it was just us sitting there going, this is fantastic, this is amazing, keep doing what you're doing.
Right. So Jason Corey is the guy's name, yeah?
Jason Corey is the original guy who did the research in the US, yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's really good. Very accessible. It's amazing how people with no idea of what timbre is or what reverb is or what dynamics are, you can give them a mental model of that and they can practice it and they can, they get to a point where they're going, why does the dialogue sound bad? Well, it's because the microphone is too far away or too close, or it's too close to a wall, or there's too many reflections in the room, or in post-production they can go, well, it's a bit, there's a bit too much at 2K, or there's not enough above 5K, or they just know what to do.
Right, okay.
I mean, my kind of basic criteria really is they need to go out the door here as film students and be able to record perfect location dialogue. And that's just a godsend then for the post people, because they're like, well, we have the dialogue, we have the atmos, so now we can just, they're not fixing stuff. They're just putting it together.
Right.
I think that's not to blow my own trumpet. I'm not the only person teaching sound. I have other colleagues on the same course, and we work together on the stream from first year to fourth year. But we hosted I forget the exact title of it, but it's the film festival for all of the third level courses in Ireland, and they all. Most of them completely lacked sound. I mean, there were some productions that had no sound at all. You're looking at animations that have little or no sound. There wasn't even credits for sound. Nobody did it. Nobody's doing the sound on these short films that students are making. And so it looks like we're the only degree course that includes sound.
Would that be a way for a student to get ahead of the posse? To accept that sound is needed?
That's a really interesting question because, funnily enough, in the TV and film business, the sound jobs are kind of oversubscribed. There's lots of people who want to do those jobs. Nobody wants to be a boom op, but lots of people want to do post, and they want to do mixing, and the
showbiz side.
Yeah, but what we need is assistant directors, VT operators, the less glamorous stuff, or the titles that nobody knows, don't know what that job is.
Right.
But once they go through our degree and, on the theory side, you give them the framework and the language and the understanding of how it works, then they start to understand what all the roles are and they figure out where they can slot in. Well, am I allowed to complain about broadcasters that are bad?
Yeah.
I actually use not all, but some RTE stuff. Now, I mean, I say RTE, but their productions are so sliced and diced and subcontracted out and all this that it's hard to say. There's a systemic issue in RTE. They don't pay people enough. They're under-resourced. They don't retain people who learn the craft. They don't train. It's not really one person's fault or anything like that. It's just the way the system works or doesn't work. But I've used RTE news broadcasts as examples of how not to do stuff. You get things where there's clicks in the edit.
Yeah.
The dialogue level and timbre changes drastically from one person or journalist to the next, and you're like, what did they just say? I don't know
from
what
one
they said.
sentence to the next in the same clip.
Yeah. And then you compare that to the BBC, where they've got on the face of it, it's a pretty simple template, but they've got strong production guidelines. Like, you compose, if it's just camera up and journalist and no sound up, there's a way to compose the picture. There's a set of colours that they use. They have a palette. There's a place to put the mic. There's a level to set the mic width. They don't have a big furry yoke in the picture. They do it right. Like, it looks nice, and so, not that it looks nice, but there's a consistency on the BBC News. Like, when they go from one report to the next, you're not suddenly jumping from one picture composition to a completely different one. The timbre level of dialogues is consistent. You can actually hear what people are saying. My favourite one is they keep standing every time. For years they do a report. They do a report from the Dáil, and they stand across the road in front of the gate. So,
brilliant. The traffic.
Let's point a directional microphone at the noisiest thing in the place.
Yeah.
The traffic, and it's like, what? Like, listen, but see, they don't listen to it. There's nobody monitoring because they don't have the crew.
Yeah,
they don't pay
absolutely.
people to do it. Like,
I think I had sort of a couple of visits with RTE as well, and the overall feeling I got was that there was a load of guys trying hard, but they didn't have much to try with.
Yeah.
That's the sad truth of the matter. From an RTE overview, if everybody else is doing it badly, let's do it badly as well.
Yeah, well, there's motivation. It's motivation as well. Like, if you're not being paid for your skills, if you don't have a permanent contract, like, if you're not being properly rewarded for the skills and ability, and if you're not allowed to learn on the job and develop your learning over a long period of time, then of course people get demotivated. Like, it's a public service kind of model. Like, it's just
so.
I could say more.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. We might edit that out, actually. Anyway.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of a student, are you getting somebody who's just left school and thinks they might be interested in film, thinks they might be interested in sound? That sort of a student. Is that a model of a first year student? Yeah,
it is. Yeah. And, they have a bit of experience, a bit of skill. They'll have done something. Like, these days, it's it's not the least bit expensive to get a DSLR and shoot some picture, edit it on your laptop. Same with music, obviously. You can be making stuff already.
So they'll come in with a show reel, is it?
Students. Well, we don't require a show reel, but they would have done a bunch of stuff either in school or on their own or both. The better resource schools will have done those things, especially in TY. When you get a group where you have people like that in the group and their enthusiasm spills over into the rest of the group, and people can see that this can be a fun thing to do, and there's the work is fun and the work needs to be done, and then that's a good group. That's usually the way things go. Most of the time, the enthusiasm is what dominates. Very occasionally you'll get kind of a bad apple that can kind of mess things up for the group, but we deal with those things. But yeah, mostly, like, people coming in, well, we're talking about dropout rates. Like, there will often be something, 5 out of those 35, roughly, that kind of average number, I'd say, just realise this is not the course for me. And, but that's okay, because, like, they've learned that. Yeah.
And do you ever have mature students?
Yes, we do. I love having mature students because 99% of the time they're the ones who aren't afraid to ask the stupid questions. Like,
yes.
Sing the stupid question, but you'll be guaranteed, like, what they're asking is what everyone else is thinking in their heads, that they're afraid to say it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just the work ethic as well. If it's a younger age group, 18, 19, there's still a bit of that, like, oh, go away, you swat, a little bit, But if there's a mature student, everyone goes, oh, okay, let's, they just work.
Right. So that's a sort of a calming effect on the class then, is it?
Yeah. It works
a model
both
of how
ways.
to work.
Like, it's good to have a mix. Yes.
Right.
But it stands to reason. Like, if you're 18, you kind of don't really know what you want to do. Like, if I think of my own career path, when I was 18, I thought, well, I like fixing radios and making amplifiers and crappy little mixers, so why don't I do the electronics course?
SPX 90s.
That would have been luxury. It was like I tried to make a mixer using a 741 as the summing amp, and the design was for 4 inputs, but I wanted to make it 16 inputs so I could have stereo and lots of channels, and it sort of barely worked. So that kind of stuff, I wanted to learn about that kind of stuff. But of course, then when I did the course, it was all about what they call PLCs. It basically it was about a production line. So it was a lot of digital control systems, very little about audio. I mean, there was a bit of audio, obviously. And then the maths was a big challenge for me because I didn't discover until, about 10 or 15 years ago? Yeah, about 10 years ago that I have dyscalculia, which is like the maths version of dyslexia. So
Really?
that explained why it took me 4 years to do a level 6, yeah.
Wow.
I used to really struggle with the maths, the engineering maths. So I spent 4 years trying to do a level 6.
Right, okay.
And again, like, it's good to have that experience because learning difficulties are something I'd be very aware of, and having had the experience of a learning difficulty
Yourself,
and trying to get through just gives you that bit of empathy with the students, I think.
Towards the end of the process, can you see like huge growth? Did they sort of flower? Would that be a fair description of?
Yeah, you really can. You really can, yeah. I mean, I can think of an extreme example, a student who was like, he was having personal issues outside, and he accused several of us, including myself, of bullying, just very confrontational. But he was just dealing with personal stuff. He came in like kind of into music and did the film course, and like at the end, he did, like, in terms of sound, was a perfect documentary, and you wouldn't even have known watching it the kind of challenges that were involved in the sound production. He did a doc about an actor, and his audio was from all kinds of places, iPhone recording, off a lectern at a speech, various places. But the actor, he used that actor's dialogue as the VO kind of all the way through, and it was just seamless. He managed to EQ it, compress it, denoise it, all that stuff. So to the audience, they're like, oh, this is just somebody telling me their story.
Yeah.
But behind that was all of that, dealing with all those production challenges, and he just seamless with brilliant production. Amazing to go from that to that. Our students that come in and, have very basic kind of, I mean, this is a story that I like to tell. When it was during the swine flu, and I was giving out tissues, that was a while back. So, just to keep the hygiene in the lab, because people didn't want people sneezing all over their computers. And this first year kid comes up after the class, and he picked up the tissue and he said to me, I don't actually know how to use this. Just
the tissue?
Yeah. I mean, you have no idea what backgrounds people are coming from in terms of the care they have or haven't received from parents, or poverty and things like that. And then he went on to like be a director and do a brilliant short film. And again, solve lots of problems on production, and you watch the final product and you have no idea that any of these problems were dealt with. You'd only know from his report, and having been a supervisor, that he dealt with all these things, and it was just, he just took it in his stride, just dealt with it, and did the work and made the product. So it's just, the ones that get to fourth year, you definitely see that growth. And even in between, my favourite one is like, learning the frequency bands. By the time students get to fourth year, they're like, oh yeah, has it touched too much there at 500 hertz? Or, they know the band, they just take it in their stride, like, and it's just part of their vocabulary.
Yeah. Whereas
in first year, they'd be like, what's a hertz? Or they'd write 1 hertz and 2 kilohertz. That's how misunderstood the concepts would be. So they go from one extreme to the other. Yeah, definitely they do. I mean, it's not entirely down to us. I mean, it's the age group. There's personal growth happens anyway. Yeah. Between 18 and 22. So, we just help them along that path. But it's great to see it.
Could there be some argument for, instead of doing the course straight after school, they go and live a life for a year or 2 years and then do the course?
Totally.
Right.
Totally, yeah. Move out of home, get a job. I mean, I sound really old-fashioned, but definitely.
Yeah.
Or, go volunteer for a charity and work in Africa or India, or, see the world.
Right.
Just, realise firsthand that we are in the top 5%, 1% here. We live like kings. We're privileged here. We can complain about public service and resources, blah, 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 but this is a fabulous country to live and learn and work in, compared to what 95% of the world's population deals with. So yeah, definitely get some hands-on experience of life. It'd be great if that was facilitated. A gap year.
Or a gap 2 years, whatever, yeah.
A gap 2 years, yeah. But I mean, that's grand if your parents can afford to ship you off or you happen to have the money, or if you want to live on beans for a year. And we get students who they work through college, and that's a struggle. But we've had students that are, they're the shop manager or whatever. They have a bit of responsibility and they struggle in first year because of time, and then you can see what they learn from the responsibility of the job. They apply it to their college work and they get it done. And it's a struggle, but they do great.
So how long is the actual course per week, hours per week sort of thing?
There's something like 6 or 7 modules in each year. And a student would do they get 4 hours a week on each module. There's 2 lectures, 1 practical, about 20 hours or something. It's prescribed on the course, like how much homework you'd be expected to do. Like, well, I say expected, that's the wrong word. It's it would be wise. An unwise first year student, say on my course, will just come in and sit in the lecture, twiddle their thumbs, not take any notes, go to the lab, stare at the computer, watch YouTube, maybe touch a few things in Reaper. That's what I teach on. And then, not download Reaper, not know how to install any plugins, even though they have a laptop at home, you get that. And on the other side, you get students who are like, oh, cool. Where's a good place to buy a camera? Like, which headphones should I buy and what microphone should I get? And, like you can send them to some good secondhand sites for all that kind of stuff. There's tons of free apps for video and audio, as you know. So,
yeah.
Those, there's no point, like Paul White in Sound on Sound said that years ago, like there's no point in doing a media course like one of ours if you don't live, breathe, eat and sleep it. Just do something else if you're not that interested, really. Yeah, no, it's true though. The studio kind of thing is very solitary, whereas the film and TV is all about, you cannot do a production without a team, like, so it's always a team effort. It's a good thing about it. So yeah, having worked in both fields, I just found the film and TV side of things was better paid, more sociable, better hours, you've better crack with people, better chats. It was less kind of tunnel vision-y, you'd meet lots of different people and you'd travel around the country, and it was all during the day. There was no late night stuff like in the live sound.
So really, it's more grown up than the music side, is it? Is that fair description?
That's an interesting way of putting it, yeah. I mean, there are some other interesting differences. Like you'll notice that the film people are much more into what's the latest tech, what's the latest tool that can make our job more efficient, and we can meet the deadline and get it done better. Whereas the music crowd are still like, oh, analog tape, oh, vintage synth. And you're like, okay, that's brilliant, you have a vintage synth, but is it actually working at the moment? Can we use it in the session? No, we need to get it repaired. Whereas the film crowd are like, it doesn't work. Well, just fix it, like, get the job done. We have to shoot now, like. There's 30 people on the set. If your vintage Neumann microphone isn't working,
and you're not going to bring. I remember actually, I was in RT Radio, and they had a load of Neve preamps, and I was thinking, yes, we can use the Neve preamps in the session, like deadly. And your man said, no, we can't use that because it was doing a live session to air. So the last thing he wanted was to take the snare mic to drop out. So yeah. It's funny. Like the 32-bit field recorders now are becoming a lot more affordable because Zoom have them. And like I'd say, some music people think that's the work of the devil. What? You don't set the level. You don't have to set the level. You can do it in post. What? And I think that's brilliant because it takes your mind off one like pure technicality, like you set the level so the thing doesn't clip or it's not too noisy. You're focusing on the timbre, you're moving the microphone, you're listening, you don't have to worry about level. That's just fantastic. It's a godsend. Yeah, and that's a thing that I've sort of been trying to teach myself. If you record at a low level, you just forget about it because it's never an issue. It's just a thing you don't have to think about. If your signal is bopping around -12, whatever it is, just rock on then.
I just teach it like to the EBU guideline, -18 for capture on location, and the process then in post with the limiter and all that kind of stuff. But the headroom, but like, I mean, that only works if you've got decent gear. Like for a long time, the Zoom H4 was like the sort of go-to budget field recorder, and like we have a pile of those at work. I would like to take every single one of them out into the car park and individually smash them to pieces with a sledgehammer, because the noise floor on those is terrible. It's like it's barely minus 70. There's no point in recording 24 in that thing. They're absolutely useless. Very poor headphone amp in it. You can't. It's just too quiet. There's no mixer, so you can't solo your 2 input channels. Terrible thing. I mean, just the fact that it's handheld. It's the wrong form factor for location sound. It's fine if you want to do, if you're a journalist doing an interview, or if you want to capture some atmos. It's lovely for that. But that's it.
But is that not a case of picking the wrong tool then? Do you know what I mean? That is obviously the wrong tool, so you have to pick the right tool.
Exactly, yeah.
Is that fair?
But like, this is the kind of, there was a clash ever since like the video camera, portable video camera back in the 80s came out. There's a bit of a clash between affordable equipment, the run and gun approach, trying to tell your story with a small budget, versus the pro gear. You learn the reason there is such a thing as professional gear. It's not because it's expensive. It's because it doesn't break. It's super quiet. You can just rely on it. It's not going to get in the way, and you'll meet your deadline efficiently. That's what it's about. And like you were talking to Chris Walls there in that interview, that's something that needs to be experienced as well. I think, when you're mixing in a room. That time when I met you first, that was in Peter Marr's studio.
Oh yeah,
Chris had just done that one.
Oh,
and that's one of those studios
show?
where all
right, that's where we met initially.
That whole day, yeah. It was 2009, 8 or 9, might have been 8.
Okay.
Not sure.
Yeah,
but I mean, it would have been maybe the second time I was in a room that good. But it's the kind of room where you put up the fader and you listen to the vocal and you just know if it works or if it doesn't work. Like if you're listening to your favorite albums, you just hear, so that's the vocal take they pick because it works. They're going for it. There's no second guessing. Yeah, like in the podcast there, Chris mentioned that you can have a cognitive process going. Your brain can compensate for all kinds of problems in a room and in a system. You can learn the room. Comes a point though where that's really taxing your stamina, and it's just going to tire you out. His example of the guy who was having the issue with whatever frequency it was, and it was the
Fraser T. Smith.
Yeah.
Like,
so I mean, obviously he's a seriously good listener. He could hear there was a problem, but he just didn't know the cause. Like on a really basic level with students, like if I'm teaching critical listening to students, they're completely wasting their time trying to do it on Apple AirPods.
Absolutely.
They need a decent pair of headphones. Like the minimum decent currently would be like Audio-Technica M20s. That's a very decent device for critical listening. You can, it's pretty much not going to get in the way. I mean, you could do better, obviously, but it's affordable for a student. They're not going to be able to learn anything about critical listening if they haven't got something that's reasonably transparent. Absolutely, but then in a room like that, when you actually experience it, you bring up the vocal and you go, oh, there it is. Like there's no second guessing. It's just right there viscerally. You don't have someone telling you, oh, this is a flat signal from 20 years. So you can just hear it, you can experience it, you can feel it in your body. It's just right there. It just speaks. Educationally speaking, that experience is so important because like our hearing system, the meat, the head, the HRTF, whatever you want to call it academically or technically, it's connected directly to your instinct. Like it's a survival mechanism. Your ears don't go off. You can close your eyes, but you can't close your ears. So we experience sound on a very instinctual level. It's largely subconscious. And that's why it gets neglected in film, because it isn't until you actually experience amazing sound that you viscerally, instinctively feel, oh, right. And then it's the sound that's making me connect with this. That's making me have this feeling. Like in film, the sound work, the sound is good when nobody says anything about it. If the sound is bad, it'll be criticised. Or, and people want, the other thing I really detest hearing is people going, but the average person, they don't know, they don't know 10 kilohertz versus 5 kilohertz. They won't know if there's only 10K bandwidth versus 20K. Yeah, they might not be able to describe or tell you what the problem is, but they'll go, I don't like it. they'll instinctively, there'll be a visceral response, like an emotional response to it.
Yeah, or even a sort of immaterial response, as in no response. And that can pass because nobody's complaining. Yeah. How do teachers teach that appreciation? Like when you're talking about the visual guys, why does somebody have to be purely visual or purely audio? Why can't they be both?
Well, they are both. It's just that the interest with the film students is visual. That's their kind of creative field. Like I'm not subscribing to this model that's misunderstood of, there's, what do they call it? The kinesthetic learners and visual learners and all that. That's a much misunderstood teaching practice. I forgot the name escapes me now, the guy that originated it, but he originated as a model to approach teaching and how the mind works. He never said one person is one way, another person is another way. It turns out in the research that it depends on what you're being taught. We all deploy different senses depending on the thing we're being taught. And if you're teaching anything, you have to engage different senses. If you for example, you can't teach somebody by just standing there and telling them the thing. That only works for certain things in certain situations. And the notion that you have to learn using practice, that doesn't work either, because there's lots of very experienced studio engineers out there who have no clue about impedance or bandwidth or how sound propagates in a room. And they have lots of misunderstandings about it because they never had the theory. And equally, you have people who have all theory and just keep them away from the musicians or a band because they'll just wind them up. You need both. Like people often say, I never learned anything on the degree, I only learned on the job. But the thing is, you wouldn't have been able to learn on the job if you hadn't got that framework of language even, and just to be able to talk about it and have the mental models to describe the concepts in your field and then go and do the job. And then in terms of teaching students, just the critical listening, well, it's called reflective practice. It's a very standard enough teaching tool. So the way I give you an example of it, it's with first years who have, no experience with sound. They get the Zoom app on their phone. They go out into their environment and I get them to record what they hear and then come back and do an evaluation of what they've heard, and just simple questions like describe what you heard, what was good about it, what was bad about it. I'd have given them very basic definitions of timbre and space, so they'd have kind of a vocabulary to describe it and talk about it. So they would do that at least 3 times, and each time, they would look at their previous reflection and then go, okay, so I'll do this thing differently the next time. So simple things like, well, it was too quiet, so this time I'll move the phone closer. And then they go, well, now it sounds completely different because I've moved the phone closer because the space sounds different or the timbre sounds different. So then they'll do it a third time and they'll get the exact spot. So it's a process of reflection. But you have to give them the structure to go through that, and you have to do it within a time frame where they can remember what they already did before.
Right.
And have a record of what they thought. So that's all, basic teacher stuff where you have a plan, you have a timeline, and you have a structure that they can work in.
What would you use from music when you're doing critical listening?
Like I have one lab with mono and stereo classic recordings, and they listen to them in terms of space and dynamics. So,
and what songs are they? Or?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember because I haven't done it in a couple of years because I don't do it with those younger groups. I would have used the Buddy Holly remastered stuff for the mono because it just sounds so amazing. And another great track, there's a lot of tracks that the core is Forgiven, Not Forgotten. That's just, there's a lot in that educationally in terms of space and timbre. You can hear the individual instruments, but there isn't this kind of false notion of separation. It's a composite whole. It's a story, that song. There's a feel in it. But you can break it down easily into its component parts, at least a new listener can. Another one I like to use is I have the multi-track of Killer Queen.
All right.
So I actually that with the second year broadcast students, they would mix like maybe the intro, first chorus, and throw on a fade on the outro. But like that's the kind of song where you can put up the faders at 0 and it's pretty much there.
makes,
You got to add the reverb. You got to add the reverb because reverb is a big feature. But you don't need, you'll get largely close to the original without EQ even. Because it's the way they played it. I mean, you listen to that.
Yeah.
The only thing that's overdubbed is Brian May because he was sick when they were doing the rest. So what you hear on that is that's what the band actually sounded like. That's Queen.
Yeah.
So when you have something like that. But the other thing about that song is it's a narrative, it's a story, and it builds. So it just gets a little bit louder in each verse and chorus and builds to a climax. So in terms of automation, that's an easy thing to do because anyone can connect to the narrative of the story in the song, and then they go, okay, this is what the song feels like. So how do you make that happen technically? So you've got to do some automation. The panning on it is very simple. So it's a good one for students to learn the difference between reverb and pan because people don't know the difference. So on that one, if it's panned, it's going to be it's LCR. So the panning is going to be very obvious if it's panned. The reverb is real obvious on the voice because it's a feature. And then reverb on other stuff, it's like, okay, if it sounds to you like it's sort of panned, put reverb on it. So it's a really simple, I make it a very simple lesson and simple criteria. But the great thing about it, it's a very achievable goal. You can get super close to the original mix with some very simple steps and it's very doable. And it works like a film because there's a story in it. They mark out verse, chorus, middle bit, outro. And then it's like scenes in a movie and each one gets a slightly different treatment. So that would take, that's about 3, possibly 4 2-hour labs. And they'd get to the end, they'd have a mix of it. Maybe at the end, they might put the phaser on somewhere as a bonus.
Like, is that 4 classes then on 4 different occasions, or is it across the day?
Yeah, 4 2-hour labs. One
right.
per week.
Okay. So will they reflect on the work done so far? Is that and make changes appropriate? Is that the teaching, or is that
not with that particular one? No, not with that particular one. Like I've it finally honed now where I know how long it takes them to do each bit of the production to reach a certain level.
Right.
And then I'd assess it in class and give them feedback. Like it's continuous assessment, so they get feedback on each. I've built in time at the end. I can sit with each student and give them time. Now that's assuming I've only got 15. If you've more than 15, it's a bit of a balls.
Right.
To do that. Because if you can imagine, like if you have, if you have 15 students, you have 2 hours, 5 minutes per student, that's an hour of your time just talking to them once. And that's assuming, nothing happens at the computer. They know how to download it off OneDrive. They know how to load it into Reaper, all that stuff. So, but, I would have done other things beforehand where they've practiced those kind of basics and they'd have that kind of thing nailed.
Right.
But you'd be surprised how basic it can be. It can be like, if you have kids coming into first year, we think they're digital natives, but they're using mobile devices all the time. So they have no idea that the media files are large things and the project file is this little tiny thing. And even the size of a file, they don't know what the difference between a file and a folder is. So you have to go through all that first before you can get to the stage where you're talking about, is there too much at 2 kilohertz?
Yeah.
Actually get the sound off the computer into their ears. That's a good question. It depends on the group.
Are you 6 months in it before lads are hitting the groove?
Well, with those basics, I would say at most 2 months. I would do a bunch of simple enough labs where there's kind of if they've not got the media files uploaded, then they fail that, but it's only a few small marks. So it just gives them a solid kind of, I failed that because I didn't do this. Right, I better get on top of that.
I better do that.
It's a punishment and reward kind of system, very basic, old school teaching. Except it's just a grade instead of a cane. But again, like the other thing with teaching is you have to do that stuff over and over and over again. Sometimes it can be a bit like Groundhog Day because you could have, you'd have a second year group. You'd have one half of the group for 2 hours, then you'd follow that with another one for 2 hours, and exactly the same problems would come up. But like I was saying, like by the time they get to even the end of first year, actually, like I get the first years to do a sound design project, and they take their own field recordings and they do a bunch of processing, very simple, reversing, time stretching, bit of reverb, bit of EQ, make a structured piece 1 minute long with your own sounds, They even do a little bit of subtractive synthesis and a little bit of sampling. Put all that together and make this mad 1 minute sound piece. They do amazing stuff. I mean, because these are people, they're not musicians, but they're making a kind of musical piece, and just the ideas they come up with. I'd say at this stage, I've got a collection of the synth plugin I use is the TAL noisemaker. Like the sounds that the students have come up with, make a bank of presets with those. They're amazing. Things I'd never think of. And like I do sound design, as a kind of a side gig. And some of the stuff they come up with is like, I would never have thought of that. That's cool. Because their approach, the way they look at it is totally different to yours.
I guess you can learn as well from your students.
Absolutely.
As well. Do you do them?
Teaching is the best way to learn. And that goes back to what you were saying at the start about trying to use that hour. And that hour can be intimidating. You feel like you have to fill it up. But after a while you realise, I need to let the students do some work. I need to collaborate with them and let them teach me stuff as well. And then you realise it becomes...
Unfortunately, there's no exam in that.
Oh, you can make you can make it an examinable thing. Like you can.
All right.
Especially like with some of the second years this year, I did their reflection on various critical listening things. I just had a chat with them. Like, what did you think of it? How did you feel about it? What did it do or what it didn't do? And that's what I graded them on. A little discussion, individual discussion. I did that with a few of the practicals, and then they take what they learned from that and they'll use it in the project. So this would have been mainly to do with EQ and compression and limiting. Well, limiting, not compression. Just on dialogue and what it does. And also different microphones. We did that with different microphones as well on dialogue. So I kind of pushed the ball out a little there with the second years to do that. They would try different microphones and have an opinion on how they sounded on different voices. And it's great, Some student would say, oh my God, I hate Rode NT5s. They're so essy. And that's fine. It's great that they have a strong opinion about a microphone because it means they have an aesthetic that's associated with the practice.
But is that sound on sound speaking or is it the student speaking?
Oh, it's amazing, yeah. No, they can hear that stuff. They love they wouldn't be reading sound on sound at all. This is the film students.
I suppose that's true as well, yeah.
I mean, it was when I was doing with fourth years, I used to do, I haven't had fourth years for a couple of years, but we'd do Foley and I'd give them a bunch of mics to try out, So we've got nice mics. We've got 414, we've got a U87, we've got a KM184, yeah. So, so they try the 184, they try the NT5 and the NT55, they try Audio Technica 2020. But what's really funny is they have no mass in the cost of these microphones. They're not reading the magazines, they're not getting advertised at, they're film students. Given the U87 and the 2020, they nearly always prefer the 2020. Now, that's because our 87 was a bit broken for a while. There was something loose in the grill. So sometimes it would sound fine and other times it would be weird and phasey. But they could hear that. And they would go for the 2020 instead. The 184, which I personally I don't like it. Like the original 84 is nicer, or the Gefell. Anyway, I can't remember the number. It's the same form factor. It's a small diaphragm pencil capacitor mic. But for their purposes, for Foley, they'd always go for the NT5, because it's got the boost that the older Neumanns would have had, that nice top end thing. Whereas the 184, for me anyway, it's kind of this weird halfway between, it's got a bit of a boost, but it's not enough of a boost. It's just sort of, but these are all subjective opinions. And if students start to relate those kind of subjective opinions with objective things like the frequency response to the microphone. No, they wouldn't get as far as transient response, but the music techs would. But they'll have an opinion and they'll have an idea of which tool they need to use for a job, and they start to realise that they can be creative with microphones in the same way they can be creative with lenses, because it's kind of a similar thing.
I found that the idea of how does a microphone sound is a tough concept to understand, as it were. So I found that putting a 57 up first and comparing a microphone to that was a useful way to, you can always go back to the 57 and have a sound. There's the reference. And is it brighter than that? And is it bassier than that? And all that sort of stuff. Would you ever do that sort of thing?
I would, yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And Jason Corrie has a good bit of well-grounded, evidence-based teaching kind of plans around that sort of approach.
Okay.
One of the biggest issues there is I'm not sure if I'm using exactly the right term now, but your auditory memory, as in your ability to remember the timbre.
Yes.
For most people, it's about 5 seconds.
Yes.
Don't know. There's not enough research, as far as I know. I haven't looked for a couple of years now since I did my MA, but there's not enough. I don't think there's any research with expert listeners to see what their auditory memory is like. I find myself, I might be maybe 8 or 9 seconds. That's what I can do. I usually build the practical so that if they're doing some kind of comparison, try and keep it within that 5 second window so there's they can meaningfully hear the difference.
Right, yeah.
But, when you have more advanced students, like the music tech students, that you're kind of talking about, and maybe not, third years and fourth years, then you can start to have those kinds of 57, or try different mics on the guitar cab, switch between them, and we'll have a chat about it. And it's great when you get to that level, because that's the real nitty gritty then. And it's all about when you're at that level, they're able to think critically. So that means if they can have an opinion about a microphone, then they can articulate about lots of other things, because they have a mental model of all the different concepts they need to, like timbre, space, dynamics, and they can put it together and make a plan for a project.
So that's Tomás's way to do it. Many thanks to him for taking the time to chat. Do visit geniusmove.ie to find out about recording courses to suit you. Thanks for listening.